After winning 200 million yuan, I was kicked out of the house by my family. This is what happened. Last week, I hadn't had time to tell anyone about the 200 million yuan I had won. I decided to quit my 9-to-5 job and return to my hometown with the 200 million yuan that had just been deposited into my account. When I arrived at the station, I took out my phone and called my dad, wanting him to pick me up. He sounded a little surprised. "Why did you come back so suddenly?" I joked. I was laid off, unemployed, and went home to live off my parents. The other end of the phone paused for a moment, and then just said, "Take a taxi yourself. I'm busy." Then he hung up. It was pouring rain that day. I waited at the station until dark, but no one came to pick me up. I sighed, pulled my suitcase, and walked home in the rain. Just as I arrived at the door, I heard a familiar voice through the crack of the door. "Mom, I'm soaked like this just because of the transfer of ownership. Tan Xiangxiang is unemployed, so transfer the house to my name quickly. I don't want to argue with her." That was my sister-in-law's voice, with obvious dissatisfaction. My mother's voice followed immediately. "Yes, she is unemployed, so don't expect to return the house to her. Don't think too much. This is all for the good of you and your sister." My sister-in-law sneered. "When she comes back, let her go out and rent a house. I don't want to live together with her." My heart sank. My hands couldn't stop shaking. Rain flowed down my cheeks. I couldn't tell whether it was rain or tears. After standing there for a long time, I decided to knock on the door. I felt a little lucky. After all, my parents always favored my brother, but my brother loved me since I was a child, so he shouldn't be the same as them, right? The door opened, and what greeted me was my mother's forced smile. "Xiang, you're back," she said with pretended concern. I nodded, forced a smile, and asked casually, "Why didn't Dad come to pick me up?" "Oh, the rain is so heavy. Your dad said he was worried it would be unsafe, so he wanted to wait until the rain subsided before picking you up," she explained, and her voice sounded very natural, as if she had never said those words just now. I changed my shoes, glanced at the shoes next to me that were still dripping with water, and asked knowingly, "Did you just come back from outside?" My mother's eyes flickered for a moment, and then she smiled and said, "Yes, I went to your sister-in-law's house, and it rained heavily when I came back, and my shoes were soaked." I said, "Oh," lightly, and a chill spread in my heart. I dragged my suitcase towards my room, but when I opened the door, I saw that it was full of clutter, and there was no place for me to stay. "Mom, why did my room become a storage room?" I said in a cold voice. The mother smiled awkwardly. "There are too many things at home, and you don't come back often, so I'm just using it to store things temporarily." "What about my previous things?" "You still here?" She pointed to a few messy bags of things on the balcony and said, "They are all here. Your sister-in-law collected them for you." I sneered. "I don't even have my own room? I paid for this house. Don't I even have the right to live in it?" As soon as the words fell, my sister-in-law shouted impatiently in the living room. "Tan Xiang, it's amazing that you bought the house. You come back now. Do you want to drive us away?" Her arrogant look instantly ignited the anger in my heart, but I still suppressed my emotions and didn't want to get entangled with her. "Am I an outsider in this family? Or are you?" I asked back with cold eyes. My sister-in-law sneered, but said nothing more. My mother lowered her head, looking helpless, as if I was the unreasonable one. I pushed open the door of the study and saw my brother was immersed in the game and didn't notice my arrival at all. "Brother, I'm back." I stood behind him and said softly. He finally turned around, glanced at me calmly, and said, "Well, I'm glad you're back. Don't take your sister-in-law's temper to heart." I looked at him coldly, and suddenly my heart was desolate. It turned out that he was just like them, and had already planned to push me out. The house was in my name, but they were all thinking about how to cheat the house away from me under the guise of family affection. "Brother, my room is filled with clutter by you guys. Where am I supposed to live?" I pushed open the door, looked around the cluttered room, and my voice turned cold. My brother took off his headphones and glanced at me nonchalantly. "Wait until I finish this game." I stood at the door, my hands unconsciously clenched. A few minutes later, he finally finished, walked over lazily, and said with a hint of apology, "Don't be anxious, don't be angry. Mom and your sister-in-law always say that there are too many things at home and there is no place to put them, so they piled them up in your room." "Then where do I live?" I continued to ask, my patience almost exhausted. He rubbed his hands as if weighing the options. "How about this, your sister-in-law and I will stay in a hotel these few days, and you can stay in our room." I sneered. "Are you planning for me to live here for a long time?" Or are you just sending me away for a few days? He was stunned for a moment, not expecting me to be so direct, and asked, how long do you plan to stay this time? I narrowed my eyes slightly and made a decision. I don't plan to leave again. After so many years of wandering, it's time to come back. I plan to live here permanently, but a hotel is not realistic. You can't always occupy your room, so why not let mom and sister-in-law clean up my room? His expression froze, and the scene became awkward for a moment. After a few seconds, he said, okay, I'll let them clean up right away. Just as I finished speaking, my sister-in-law's sharp voice came from the kitchen. Collect? Where to collect? The house is so small that there is no place to put your feet. What are you going to collect? Suddenly, the atmosphere in the living room became even more tense. I looked at my brother, who hesitated for a moment and finally said in a deep voice, then I'll take care of it. Just as he was about to do it, my mother immediately stopped him and said, what can you collect? Don't make trouble. I helplessly watched them decline, not dwelling on the issue anymore. Instead, I suddenly remembered something else. It's okay if you don't want to take it. Is the apartment I bought before still empty? Give me the key and I'll move in there. As soon as the words came out, the air seemed to freeze. My mother's expression froze and her eyes avoided me. I looked at her, then at my brother, and suddenly I had a bad feeling. What's wrong? I demanded. My brother touched his nose, looking a little embarrassed. Xiang, that apartment is now occupied by your sister-in-law's brother, so it's not convenient for you to go there. Oh, I sneered, my tone becoming more and more sharp. What about the one in Zhangyang Garden? Can you give me the key? As soon as these words came out, the whole living room fell into a dead silence. The silence lasted for several seconds, and even my father, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke slowly. Xiang, are you coming back to get a house? Or are you coming back to show off how many houses you bought? His words were like a bucket of cold water poured over me, and I froze. Then, the rage in my heart rushed straight to my head. Dad, in your heart, am I such a person? I said, my voice shaking, furious. I asked you where I was going to live, and you said nothing. Now that I have arranged it myself, you come out and accuse me of showing off? I have never seen anyone showing off that they bought 3 houses, but have nowhere to live. Their faces turned ugly instantly, but no one spoke. At this moment, I understood in my heart that they wanted me to leave. As an unemployed person, I became a burden and an eyesore in their eyes. I took a deep breath and smiled sarcastically. Is that what you guys think? You're not willing to clean up the room for me to live in, so you want to force me to leave, right? Still no one responded. I looked at everyone. My sister-in-law sneered. Her tone was sharp. You are in your 30s, and you haven't gotten married yet, but now that you are unemployed, you still plan to stay at home? Don't you have any idea? I snorted and replied to her, you'd better shut up. I'm asking about my parents and my brother. After these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the living room became even heavier. When my sister-in-law was speechless, my brother's face darkened instantly, with dissatisfaction in his eyes. He turned to look at me, and his tone became harsh. Tan Xiang, I can spoil you, but she has no obligation to do so. Please be polite to her. I smiled coldly, completely unmoved. I have no problem with her. The problem is you. Since you don't say anything, of course, I can only go directly to her. I continued, Tan Kai, I bought all 3 houses. You used one as your wedding house, and your brother-in-law lives in one. You have gained so many benefits, and you still dare to act like a big shot here? If you have the guts, return all 3 houses to me, and then you can move out with your wife and our parents. My words made Tan Kai's face look extremely ugly. His lips trembled, but before he could say anything, my dad had already stood up from the sofa, his voice echoing throughout the living room. Tan Xiang, shut up. But I ignored his anger and asked calmly, let me ask you one last time. Is there any place I can live in among these 3 houses? Just then, my mother replied coldly, no. I nodded, scanning their faces, feeling only chill in my heart. So, you are planning to completely cut off ties with me, right? The room was silent, and no one wanted to meet my eyes. I made up my mind and announced in a deep voice. Okay, since you have decided, from today on, I, Tan Xiang, have no parents, no brothers or sisters, and no family. After that, I pulled my suitcase and walked out of the house without looking back. The air outside was freezing cold, but I was colder than that. I booked a hotel room, sat on the bed, took out my cell phone, and called my lawyer friend. I want to ask, I said straight to the point, I bought all 3 houses in full, but they were registered in other people's names. Can I get them back now? There was silence for a few seconds on the lawyer's end, and then he asked me, have you ever signed a gift agreement, even an oral agreement? I thought about it and I said at the time that one of the houses was for my parents to live in during their old age. There was no verbal or written agreement for the other houses. After hearing this, she replied, the house I gave to my parents may be more troublesome, but it is not a problem to get the other 2 back. The property rights are still yours. I nodded and then made up my mind. Okay, then I'll trouble you to be my lawyer. I want to get all 3 houses back. After hanging up the phone, I leaned against the bed, feeling as if a piece of my chest had been cut out, empty. Looking back over the years, I started working part-time in high school and stayed in Shanghai after graduating from college, working hard and saving money to save enough money to buy these 3 houses. This is what I bought with more than 10 years of my youth and all my savings. My original plan was to give 1 house to my parents for retirement, 1 to live in, and the 3rd to rent out to make some money so that I could retire and live a relaxed life when I was older. However, the reality now is that my parents not only occupy 1 house, but also want to transfer the one I gave them to Tankai. Their appetite will never be satisfied. They even want to take all the houses I bought for themselves and kick me out of the house just because I lost my job. I took my phone out of my bag and saw the long string of numbers in my bank account. I couldn't help laughing. Tears started to flow as I laughed. What's so scary? I still have enough money. I can spend it all in my lifetime. So I got up, washed my face, calmed down, went out for a big meal, and then went back to the hotel for a good sleep. The next morning, I went to the sales office of Jinling Bay, the most luxurious villa area in the city. The villa was fully decorated and sold for more than 7 million yuan. I paid for it directly with a credit card, moved in with my luggage, and hired a nanny to cook and clean. In this way, I spent a leisurely half-month in the new villa, and everything seemed calm. Until one day, I received a call from my mother. As soon as I answered the phone, I heard her angry roar. Tan Xiangxiang, what the hell are you doing? Tan Xiangxiang, are you crazy? You actually sued us. I heard my mother's angry voice from the other end of the phone, almost making the phone explode. I chuckled and replied lazily. Ms. Liu, who are you? I am suing Tan Kai. He occupied the 3 houses I bought. I paid for these 3 houses in full. They have nothing to do with you. Tan Xiangxiang, you've grown cocky now, haven't you? You want to take things to court over a minor conflict? Great. If you dare to sue my son, I'll sue you too. You unfilial daughter. Oh, you want to sue me? I snorted disdainfully. Do you think that a few words of severing ties can really sever the relationship? Let me tell you, the law doesn't say that. My brother said that as long as you're alive, I have to provide for your retirement. Okay, go ahead and sue me. I replied nonchalantly. I'll pay whatever the court decides. I heard that I only need to pay a few hundred yuan a month, which I can afford. Besides, I heard that the law also accepts material support, so I'll buy you sanitary napkins worth 500 yuan when the time comes. How about that? Go ahead and sue me. I'll be waiting. Ms. Liu on the other end of the phone was furious and started to curse. You bitch. Just wait. Your brother will beat you to death when he sees the lawyer's letter. I hung up the phone with a sneer. Okay, let Tankai come. I'll wait. As soon as I hung up the phone, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw my neighbor next door standing at the door with a plate of fruit. She looked older than me, but she had a friendly smile. Hello, I'm Gooing from next door. She took the initiative to speak. I was stunned for a moment and suddenly remembered that she was a host of this city's TV station. No wonder she looked familiar. Hello, I'm Tan Xiangxiang. Please come in. She smiled and waved her hand. No, I just came to say hello. Our classmates are having a party at my house. I'm afraid I'll disturb you, so please forgive me. I smiled politely. It's okay, just have fun. Gooing looked at me and suddenly smiled. Hey, you look about the same age as us. Why don't you come over and play with us? At first I thought the person living in your house was an elder. I wanted to refuse, but she was so enthusiastic that I couldn't resist, and she just dragged me away. I didn't think much about it, because there was a nanny watching at home, so I just put on my slippers and went with her to the next door. As soon as I entered the house, it was already full of people, chatting animatedly and preparing to have a barbecue together. Gooing introduced me to everyone with a smile. This is my next-door neighbor, Tan Xiangxiang. I just sat down, and before I had time to say hello, two people suddenly walked in from the door, Tan Kai and Li Jiao. As soon as they saw me, Li Jiao's face changed instantly, and she rushed over directly, her tone full of sarcasm. Tan Xiangxiang, how did you find this place? I smiled faintly, looked at her arrogant look, and did not respond. Guing obviously didn't know the relationship between us, and was about to introduce me to Li Jiao. This is my neighbor. Before she could finish, Li Jiao spoke first. Don't introduce her. She is the sister-in-law I always complain to you about. She is over 30 years old and still hasn't married. She lost her job and went home to live off her parents. I'm so sorry. I didn't expect her to follow us here. As soon as these words came out, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became subtle. Everyone knew that I was the neighbor that Guing personally invited, and it was obvious that I lived in this villa area. The me that Li Jiao described was completely inconsistent with the reality. Everyone began to look at each other, and the atmosphere became awkward for a while. Guing was stunned for a moment, then frowned and asked me tentatively, "Do you know each other?" I smiled and nodded. "What a coincidence. This is my eldest brother and eldest sister-in-law. I didn't expect you two were classmates." Guing suddenly realized and said with a smile, "What a coincidence." She patted Li Jiao on the shoulder and joked, "Li Jiao, Tin Xiangxiang didn't come with you. She's my neighbor. I thought we were all about the same age, so I called her over to play together." Don't get me wrong. Tan Kai and Li Jiao's faces suddenly turned ugly. Obviously, they were surprised by this reversal. Especially Li Jiao. The mocking words just now seemed to hit her in the face. She stood there in a dilemma. Her expression was extremely embarrassed. "What? She's your neighbor? How is that possible?" Li Jiao's eyes almost popped out. She obviously couldn't accept the fact before her. Guing was speechless for a moment because of this embarrassing situation. She looked at me, and Li Jiao also stared at me closely. "Tan Xiangxiang, aren't you unemployed? Are you renting a house or a villa by yourself?" I smiled and responded calmly. "I didn't rent it, I bought it." Upon hearing this, Li Jiao was stunned for a second, then laughed out loud with disdain on her face. "Huh? Are you kidding? You want to buy a villa? Didn't you empty your family's savings when you bought those 3 houses? You were also fired by the company, so where did you get the money to buy a villa? I think you got paranoia after being kicked out of the house." Her ridicule left me unmoved, and instead I felt calmer. I have indeed worked hard for more than 10 years and saved money to buy 3 houses. You also know that I have worked hard and almost emptied out all my savings, so you unscrupulously occupied those 3 houses. After I resigned and returned home, you couldn't wait to drive me away and didn't even leave me a room. Li Jiao sneered, but didn't say anything. I continued, "But it doesn't matter. I have hired a lawyer, and we'll get all the houses back. So, Ms. Li, Mr. Tan, I advise you to prepare to buy your own house as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you are forced to move out after the court's ruling, I'm afraid you will have trouble with no place to live." As soon as I finished speaking, the whole room fell silent, and everyone started whispering. It was obvious that no one had expected things to turn out like this. Someone couldn't help but ask Li Jiao. "Li Jiao, didn't you always say that your parents-in-law bought you 3 houses? You also complain to us every day that your sister-in-law is lazy and ugly, and she is almost 40 years old and still stays at home and doesn't get married. You said that she lost her job and came home to live off her parents. You are so shameless. What's going on now?" I couldn't help laughing when I heard these doubts. "So that's what you said about me behind my back. You're really good at confusing right and wrong." I stopped pestering her and said calmly, "It doesn't matter. Anyway, you're Ms. Liu." "Oh, that's my mom, has called me. She said she has received the lawyer's letter. You can see what belongs to you when you go back later." At this time, I looked at Guing, feeling a little embarrassed for stealing the show. "Ms. Gu, I'm really sorry for interrupting your party. I'll go back first. Have fun, and you're welcome to visit my home when you have time." After I finished speaking, I was about to leave, but Li Jiao grabbed my arm, obviously not wanting me to leave easily. "Tan Xiangxiang, tell me clearly, where did the money for buying the villa come from? Did your mother give it to you secretly?" Li Jiao's voice was full of suspicion and jealousy. I looked at her, then at Tan Kai, and said coldly, "Your husband has a mother, but I don't." After saying that, I shook her hand off fiercely and left Gu Ying's house without looking back. Tan Kai and Li Jiao were obviously unwilling to give up and hurriedly chased me out, wanting to continue questioning me, but I went into my villa and locked the door from the inside, blocking their way. At this time, my nanny Yang Qing, a recent college graduate, stood beside me and seemed even more nervous than I was. Seeing her scared look, I couldn't help but laugh. Don't be afraid, they can't get in. Yang Qing looked at me, still a little uneasy. I smiled and patted her shoulder. Relax, it's okay. By the way, send me your ID number and WeChat. I'm planning to travel for a few days. You can come with me, I said casually. Yang Qing was stunned for a moment, then quickly waved his hand. I just started working and don't have money to travel. I smiled more easily. Don't worry about the money. Follow me, and I will take care of your food, drink, accommodation, and transportation. Don't worry. She was still a little hesitant, but couldn't help but ask curiously. Then where are we going? I pondered for a while. To be honest, after working for so many years, I almost never expected to have the time and spare money to travel. Now I suddenly want to travel, and I don't have any idea for a while. I turned around and asked her, "Is there anywhere you want to go?" Yang Qing thought about it. A hint of anticipation flashed in his eyes, and he whispered, "I have always wanted to go to a small town in the southwest to see the scenery there." Okay then, I nodded with a smile. Then let's go to the southwest town. The next day's flight was booked quickly. Yang Qing called her family and said she wanted to travel with me. Her family was a little worried and even asked me if I was taking her to do something bad, such as cutting her kidneys. I was so amused that I hurriedly explained to her, but she told her family seriously, no. However, I had only known her for half a month, and it was indeed a bit suspicious for her to suddenly propose to travel together. Although the girl didn't talk much, she looked very well behaved. I smiled and explained, it was indeed a sudden idea to travel. By the way, the two people outside are my brother and sister-in-law. She nodded slightly, looking a little puzzled. I then smiled and added, actually, I recently won a big prize and quit my job. After that, Yang Qing's eyes flashed with envy, but she didn't ask how much she won. I continued, my parents favor boys over girls, you know. They just knew that I was unemployed and went home, and kicked me out without even a second thought. In fact, I had saved money and bought 3 small houses. I originally thought that I could live a good life with them when I returned home, but now they live in one house, my sister-in-law's younger brother lives in one, and the remaining one is not empty or anything, but there is no place for me anyway. I smiled self-deprecatingly. After I quit my job and came back, I thought I would enjoy myself, lie down with my family, and live happily. Who knew that I treated them as my family, but they didn't take me seriously at all. After hearing what I said, Yang Qing was silent for a while, and she didn't seem to know how to comfort me. She just said lightly, although we are family, if family affection is not cherished, there is no need to insist on it. Insisting on it will only give others the opportunity to bully you. I smiled and nodded. You were right. That's it, so don't worry, I'm not the kind of bad person who would cut your kidneys. Yang Qing was finally amused by me, and the atmosphere eased a little. Li Jiao and Tan Kai outside struggled for a while, but found that they couldn't get in, so they returned to Gu Ying's party in shame. If it were me, I would have been too embarrassed to go back. When the party ended in the evening, I saw from the window that everyone drove away, and only Li Jiao and Tan Kai walked down the mountain. After they walked away, Gu Ying came over to me, and I asked Yang Qing to make her a cup of coffee. As soon as Gu Ying entered the room, she said embarrassedly, I'm really sorry about what happened today. I didn't expect it to be so unpleasant. I shook my head and said with a smile, how can you be blamed for this? No one expected to run into Li Jiao and the others by such a coincidence. I should be the one to say sorry for disrupting your party. However, I still felt a little uneasy when I thought that Li Jiao and Tan Kai already knew where I lived. After all, with their personalities, they would not let me go easily. I said hello to Gu Ying in advance. Miss Gu, I think my family may come to harass you next. I will give their photos to the property management to prevent them from coming in. But my sister-in-law may try to contact you in your name. Gu Ying thought for a while and nodded. Don't worry, Miss Tan, they're not on my interview list. I smiled and thanked her. Thank you very much. That night, it seemed that Li Jiao and Tan Kai went home to complain to my mother. Not long after, my mother called me. She started by asking a barrage of questions. Tan Xiang, your brother said you bought a villa? When did you buy it? Where did you get the money? I held back my laughter and said in a cold tone, what does this have to do with you? After that, I hung up the phone and blocked her. Not long after I hung up the phone, Tan Kai's WeChat came. Tan Xiang, you are becoming more and more uneducated. You even blocked my parents, he accused. I looked at the phone screen, sneered, and replied easily. Oh, really? Education? Are you qualified to talk to me about education? I replied to Tan Kai. You still talk about upbringing? You're living off your parents at home, and you're occupying the house I bought. Give the house back to me, you useless man. I guess this hit a sore spot for him, and he immediately called me on video. I blocked him without hesitation. I blocked all the phone numbers and WeChat accounts of my entire family. Then, I sent photos of my parents, brother, and sister-in-law to the property management group and told them, please don't let these 4 people in. The next morning, Yang Qing and I flew to Spring City. After blocking those annoying people, the whole world became quiet and no one disturbed me for the next half month. Yang Qing also started shooting her vlog. At night, when she was concentrating on editing the video, she suddenly asked me, Mr. Tan, do you mind showing your face? I smiled and replied, I don't mind. She chuckled and continued editing the video while I fell asleep peacefully. Unexpectedly, when I woke up, her video went viral. We were both on the hot search at the same time. Netizens were very lively in the comments section. All of them were envious. Hashtag godly boss. Hashtag quit your job and become a nanny. Hashtag miss. Ask your boss if he still needs a chef. I cook delicious food. Hashtag boss, are you still in need of a gardener? I have the right expertise. Hashtag. The account gained followers like crazy, and the comments section was bustling with activity. Yang Qing stared at the phone screen with some uneasiness and looked up at me. Mr. Tan, what should we do now? I smiled and patted her shoulder. What should we do? This is a good thing. Hurry up and catch this overwhelming wealth. You can make an account. Yang Qing bit her lip and said hesitantly, then I'll split the income with you. To be honest, I have plenty of money now and don't care about the income at all. But Yang Qing and I get along very well and cook delicious food. I was a little worried that she would leave because of this. You won't quit because of this, right? She burst out laughing, and I laughed too. How is that possible, unless you fire me? I smiled easily and said, then we have to sign a contract when we get back. You can keep the income from the account yourself. As long as you don't resign, it's fine. Yang Qing insisted, I won't resign, but you are the protagonist of the video on the account. How can you not share the money? No matter how much, we will share it. Seeing her firm attitude, I nodded and said, okay, as long as you don't resign, any division is fine. It was really an unexpected success, and we were both very happy. But good things don't last forever. When things fermented to the evening, some forwarded comments suddenly began to attack me. Some people criticized me for being an unfilial daughter, saying that I blocked my parents and brother and sister-in-law, that I was not satisfied with having a villa, and even sued to grab the house. On the surface, I created the persona of a good boss, but behind the scenes, I was a black-hearted evil person. Netizens love to stir up trouble. They were still praising me in the morning, but started to turn against me in the evening. In an instant, the internet was filled with all kinds of comments, just like wild animals in the field coming out one after another. Yang Qing panicked when he saw this. Boss Tan, what should we do? She always calls me Mr. Tan or boss, insisting that this is more formal. I saw that she was worried, so I smiled and comforted her. Don't panic, it's just some noise on the internet, it's no big deal. Hearing Yang Qing still calling me Mr. Tan, I couldn't help but feel as if I was still at work. It's okay. Ignore them, let them jump around for a while. I waved my hand, signaling her not to respond in a hurry. Public opinion fermented faster and faster, especially on the second day, when several accounts began to repost and comment to criticize me, mocking my black-hearted behavior. However, I found a few familiar faces, former colleagues, who were helping me clarify the facts. They said that I worked so hard that I was reluctant to rent a house in Shanghai for more than 1,000 yuan. I saved all my monthly salary and bought a house for my parents in my hometown to honor them. As far as they knew, I did buy 3 houses, all of which were nominally under my parents' names. The so-called house grabbing was just me taking back what belonged to me. But these words of clarification were quickly drowned out by the tens of thousands of comments, and their voices were simply not enough to withstand the torrent of public opinion. So, I decided to do it myself. I spent a whole morning sorting out all the payment records, loan details, and house purchase transfers in the past few years, one by one. Then, I borrowed Yang Qing's account and started the live broadcast. Thousands of netizens immediately flooded into the live broadcast room, and the screen was full of comments. I showed everyone all the records of my work-study program from college to later working and saving money to buy a house. Netizens were a little confused for a while, and the atmosphere became quiet. "Hello, everyone. I quit my job," I said in a calm but powerful voice. I made a joke with my dad, saying that I was unemployed and would go home to live off my parents. Unexpectedly, my parents were so scared that they transferred all 3 houses under my name to my brother that day. After I returned home, there was not even a room left in any of the 3 houses. I paused and continued. I was kicked out of the house that day. You can listen to the recording. After that, I played the conversation recorded at the door that day. Some doubts arose. Some people said that the authenticity of the recording was questionable. How could someone take out a recording anytime and anywhere, as if they were well prepared? I smiled and explained calmly. That day I called my dad and asked him to pick me up, but he didn't show up all afternoon. So I went home in the heavy rain. When I got to the door, I heard them chatting in the house. My sister-in-law was complaining that they were in such a hurry to transfer the property that she got wet in the rain. My mother comforted her, saying that this was all for their own good. Otherwise, if I lost my job and went home, would they still be able to return the 3 houses to me? I continued. My sister-in-law also told me to rent a house because she was not used to living with me. What's even more outrageous is that the apartment under my name is now occupied by my sister-in-law's brother. I just want to ask why? Just because I am a daughter. I sighed softly. Why should I give away the money I have worked so hard to earn for more than 10 years if it is my family? I am willing to give it back, but since you no longer consider me a family member, of course you have to give it back to me. I also want to take this opportunity to remind everyone, especially the girls who have the same experience as me, to protect your wallet. The love you didn't get when you were a child, you can't buy it back with money when you grow up. Don't be as stupid as me, spending money all the time, thinking that money can buy family affection and love. In the end, all you get is disappointment. The comments were posted quickly, with netizens expressing their sympathy and continuing to ask questions. Someone asked what was going on with the villa. I smiled and replied calmly. I didn't want to say this, but since everyone asked, I'll be honest. I'm lucky and blessed by God. I won the lottery a while ago. As soon as I said this, the comment section exploded instantly, with comments like WTF, so cool, and this is real retribution filling the screen, and the popularity soared. More netizens began to leave messages and fill the screen, praising my experience. As soon as I finished speaking, WeChat on my phone started ringing. I opened the family group chat, and as expected, it was already in an uproar, with all the voices criticizing me. Tan Xiang Xiang, how could you do this to your family? You are so unfilial. Why did my family raise an ungrateful person like you? I chuckled and felt relieved. Sure enough, when faced with interest, family affection is just like this. Putting down my phone, I continued to interact with netizens in the live broadcast room, completely ignoring those boring accusations. Aunt, you are talking without any hesitation. I sneered in the group chat. You're going to take revenge on your parents after winning the lottery? Aunt, you are so kind, but when are you going to pay me back the 100,000 yuan you borrowed from me? Since you are so kind, why don't you buy 3 houses for your uncle to live in? Why don't you pay for them? The group was silent for a few seconds. Obviously, no one expected me to respond like this. I emptied my own pocket to buy the 3 apartments. But what's the result? I don't even have a room. What do you think of me? I continued to question him mercilessly. Tan Kai couldn't help but speak up. How can you say there's not even a room? I sneered and directly posted the recording of that day to the group. Everyone listen and judge for yourself. I have already recorded how your family treated me. Then, I typed a line in the group. From today on, I will sever ties with them and have nothing to do with you relatives. I will not stay in this group anymore. In addition, the few people who owe me money, please pay up within 1 month. Otherwise, I will hire a lawyer to handle it, and I will not show any mercy. I will take back every penny you have taken from me. If anyone wants to stand up for them, you can take them back home and vacate my house and return it to me, and I will drop the lawsuit. Those words were like a knife, and I decisively left the group. After that, Yangqing and I continued our trip, this time to Hainan, where we lived a relaxed and happy life. But my mother obviously didn't intend to let me go easily, and she actually went to court to sue me for alimony. However, what was ridiculous was that she was not yet old enough to need alimony, and the court directly rejected her request. At the same time, the judgment of my lawsuit against them to get back the house also came down. The court ruled that all 3 houses belonged to me and required them to complete the transfer within a month. But Tan Kai dragged his feet and refused to transfer the ownership, so I sent people to his company every day to block him, and even warned him that if he dared to delay, I would make his job completely fail. Just when Tan Kai was in a state of panic, my parents secretly ran to my villa park to find me without telling him and Li Jiao. The security guards stopped them, and the two of them actually knelt down at the door. The property manager felt that they were affecting the image of the villa area and sent me a message. I had no choice but to go out and meet them. When my mother saw me, her face darkened and she seemed to want to start scolding me again, but my father stopped her. He looked at me and said tentatively, "Xiang Xiang, we are at the door now. Can we let mom and dad come in and sit for a while?" I laughed sarcastically and replied coldly, "No need for that, right? Just like I have no place in your house. This is my own home, and there is no place for you either." My dad was silent, and my mom gnashed her teeth in anger and asked, "You don't want your brother to have an easy life, do you?" I heard this, my face full of confusion. You don't want him to have an easy life? Tell me, what does it mean to have an easy life? Am I going to be his ATM for the rest of his life? Or his blood bag? Haven't I done enough over the years? What else do you want me to do? My voice became colder and colder, and my mother was actually a little scared and shrank back. If you love him so much, then go sell your blood. I glared at her fiercely. Sell your blood to feed your big son. Don't bother me anymore. I feel sick just looking at you. My mother couldn't help but yelled, "Tan Xiang Xiang, how could we be so sorry for you by giving birth to you and raising you?" I laughed out of anger, my tone full of sarcasm. Sorry for me? Giving birth to me? I was born to serve Tan Kai. I was born to be Tan Kai's nanny. You raised me? Tan Kai threw his old clothes to me, and I earned money to study as soon as I graduated from high school. Have you forgotten? I was wearing Tan Kai's tattered clothes and was laughed at by my classmates. I cried and went to you, and you don't remember it. I paused, my voice extremely cold. I remember everything. I turned away from them, my gaze looking into the distance, the long-chilled emotions in my heart completely shattered. The first time I had money, I thought of coming back to give you all a good life. Although the voice was soft, every word pierced the heart like ice. How dare you mention giving birth to me and raising me? I looked at the two people in front of me, feeling cold. When I said I was unemployed, you weren't thinking about how to help me, but how to kick me out. I softened my tone and continued coldly. Tell Tan Kai to transfer the ownership immediately. If he delays again, I will ruin his job, and the same goes for Li Jiao. I won't let any of them go. In order to ensure that they acted on time, I hired a few tattooed men to accompany Tan Kai to and from get off work every day. They did nothing but silently accompany him. Tan Kai soon couldn't hold on any longer, and his boss talked to him, and he finally panicked. After half a month, Tan Kai had to bow his head and called me personally to beg me to handle the transfer procedures. I did not come forward, but let a lawyer handle all the procedures on my behalf. The three houses were quickly transferred to my name, completely getting rid of their control. However, when I found out who was living in the house, the cold feeling in my heart became even stronger. The school district house was actually occupied by Li Jiao's parents, and the apartment was occupied by her brother. My real biological parents actually gave my house to my daughter-in-law's family. This made me realize that in their hearts, my daughter-in-law was more important than me, their daughter. What am I? Just their slave. In this case, I will no longer be soft-hearted and send people to force them to move. Tan Kai's brother-in-law and his father-in-law and mother-in-law were driven out with no way out. Li Jiao was furious and had a big fight with Tan Kai, and even proposed a divorce. This pair of dogs and bitches finally tasted the bitter fruit they deserved. It was very dramatic. What I didn't expect was that those tattooed men who helped me were actually interested in my house. They asked me if I would consider selling a second-hand house, especially the one my parents were living in, which was close to the subway and the hospital and had an excellent location. I gave them a discount without hesitation and sold the house to them. After the transfer was completed, the brothers acted quickly and asked my parents, Tan Kai and Li Jiao, to leave. The four of them were suddenly homeless, and they even wanted to come to me for help. In order to avoid embarrassing the property management, I continued to hire tattooed men to guard the gate of the community. After a few days, none of the four of them saw me. Finally, I returned home in disgrace. Li Jiao wanted to divorce Tan Kai, and Tan Kai killed her in anger. After the incident became serious, Tan Kai was taken away by the police and eventually sentenced to death. My parents cried and ran to the Li family to ask for forgiveness, but the Li family was not willing to forgive them. Without their son, They collapsed and even fainted on the spot. I never cared about the follow-up of all this. Maybe one day, when they really need alimony, they will sue me again. However, when that time comes, I will just follow the legal ruling and give them the minimum alimony of 500 yuan per month. As for whether they can live to that time, who knows? I took Yangqing with me and started a free life of traveling around the world. After letting go of all this, I finally lived a wonderful life of my own.